Hey everyone, today we're going to continue our discussion of Unit 1. Last time we talked about how matter is cycled through an ecosystem, carbon, nitrogen, water, phosphorus. But now I want to talk about how energy cycles through an ecosystem. And in order to do that, we first need to determine how energy enters an ecosystem. I'll give you a hint. You can see it on the screen. Spoiler alert, it's plants. Plants will allow energy to enter the system in a way that allows organisms like animals and to access that energy, right? Grasshoppers can't access the sun's energy, but plants can through a process called photosynthesis. They convert the solar energy into chemical energy through formation of sugars and cellulose that animals can then eat and turn into energy themselves. This is how energy is transferred through a system. The rate of photosynthesis that happens in an area over a period of time is what we refer to as primary productivity. How much photosynthesis is being done in this patch of grass over the course of a month, for example. Because it's a rate, it's change over time, right? So the units are going to be the amount of energy produced within an area per unit time, such as 830 kilocalories per meter squared per year. As you change the area and the time, this value is also going to change, right? And not to mention, we got to think about what plants we're even looking at, because some plants are more effective at doing photosynthesis than others. It's also important for us to establish the difference between gross and net primary productivity. Gross primary productivity is the total rate of photosynthesis in an area. The problem is, all of that energy produced, not all of it gets used in the same way, right? And the energy that is actually able to be consumed by these organisms, in this case the grasshopper, is what we refer to as the net primary productivity. The rate at which plants produce energy that is actually available to be eaten, meaning that it hasn't been used by the plants for cellular respiration. Plants do cellular respiration, and they need energy in order to do that, right? So in order to calculate the amount of energy available for consumers, net primary productivity, we just subtract the energy used from respiration, or as I like to call it, maintenance energy. We subtract that from the gross primary productivity. That leaves us with the net primary productivity. A plant is going to use that energy to build new tissue, to grow roots, stems, leaves, twigs, branches, you name it. And what happens to those tissues? Well, they get eaten by a grasshopper or a mouse. And then that mouse gets eaten, right? It's kind of like it is a food chain. And that energy is going to pass through that food chain. Here's one diagram. Energy is absorbed by chlorophyll from the sun and the chloroplast. Some of that energy, or all of that energy, is the gross primary productivity. Some of it is used in the mitochondria to do cellular respiration. That energy is gone. Bye-bye, not available to be eaten by consumers. Whatever's left is the net primary productivity. That's available to be eaten. Same concept, different photo, different diagram. Photosynthesis comes in. The amount of energy produced in total is the gross primary productivity. Whatever is used in respiration is lost, and then whatever remains is the net primary productivity and is actually available to consumers to be eaten. Okay, last one. Third diagram, this is the best one, I think. Glucose is produced during photosynthesis. Some of that glucose is used to supply energy to drive cellular respiration, to keep things running. But the remaining amount of glucose is strung together, most likely into the form of cellulose or fiber, which is used to form most of plant tissues, right? That is stored energy inside the plant that animals can then eat and break down and use for themselves. I like to think about it like money, because who doesn't love money? Let's say I make about $80 trillion per month. That's conservative. I'm pretty good at my job, so they pay me the big bucks. But I have a nasty spending habit, and I spend about $30 trillion per month. How much do I have left to spend at the end of the month? It's a simple math problem, right? 80 trillion minus 30 trillion leaves me with a measly 50 trillion each month to save or to spend on whatever I want, right? How does this compare to primary productivity? Well, the total amount of money I made is like the gross primary productivity, the total amount of energy produced. What bills do I have to pay? What costs do the plant have to pay to maintain their lifestyle, cellular respiration? What's left over is the net, right? That's why people say, oh, I'm my net worth as opposed to my gross worth, right? So the net primary productivity is how much left over the plant has to spend on building new biomass. Give this practice problem a try now and mark your answer in the Edpuzzle on the side. Okay, hopefully you did all right. Let's take a look. Right, so I'm just moving the problem over there, and all I'm going to do now is just write down what we learned from the problem. This is a paragraph. It's a word problem. Let's condense this down into the core info. They tell us that the net primary productivity is 8,000 kilocalories per meter squared per year. They tell us that respiration is 12,000 kilocalories per meter squared per year. They want to know the gross primary productivity. This is just simple addition, right? This is the formula we use. So we plug in those numbers, and then we solve for the GPP. Boom, done, easy. Calculus genius, right? 20,000 kilocalories per meter squared per year. That's the annual rate. You don't have to have year in the answer because it asks per year in the question. Now, primary productivity is going to be impacted by a lot of different things, like I mentioned earlier. Not only the amount of sunlight, but also the temperature. If it's hotter, plants tend to be able to do photosynthesis faster. They need water to do photosynthesis and grow and exist. So that's going to impact the amount of CO2 available, right? The amount of nutrients available, and how much herbivory is going on. Are there a lot of herbivores that are going to eat up this grass and lower primary productivity? So think about the chemical reaction for photosynthesis. It requires CO2, it requires sunlight, and it requires water, right? So all of those things are going to impact it, right? That makes sense. And some of these other things are things that are sort of going to impact the plant's ability to do its job well, right? So, keeping this in mind, think about the biomes that are going to have high versus low primary productivity. The least productive ecosystems have low heat, low light, low water, low nutrients, i.e. a bad place for a plant to live, right? The desert is a great example, right? There's a lot of heat and light, but there's no water and limited nutrients, right? The soil stinks. Tropical rainforest is a great example of something with high primary productivity. It's hot, it's wet, there's lots of light, and there's plenty of nutrients available. Okay, so what do you think, besides the tropical rainforest, what biome do you think has a high net primary productivity? Right, well, take a look at this graph. On the x-axis, we've got the net primary productivity in terms of calories per meter squared per year. Green biomes are terrestrial, and blue ones are aquatic. The lowest ones, desert, open ocean, tundra and alpine, lake and stream, continental shelf, temperate grassland. But as you go up, we start to see these are the big players. Algal beds and reefs, tropical rainforest, swamp and marsh, tropical seasonal forest. Right? Why algal beds and reefs? Well, it's the phytoplankton, baby. All those microscopic plants that are living inside the water, they're doing a lot of heavy lifting, right? So in an algal bed, there's lots of algae. And wait a second, didn't I tell you that 50% of our oxygen comes from phytoplankton in the ocean? Why is it so low? Well, remember, net primary productivity is the energy produced per meter squared per year. So the primary productivity is low for the ocean, but because there's so much ocean, right, there's like, I don't know how many millions of meters squared of ocean there is, right? That means that there's actually a lot of oxygen being produced, right? Like a penny is not worth very much, but if you have a lot of pennies, you've got a lot of money. There are global patterns in net primary productivity that are going to relate to climate. Right, going to relate to these factors we talked about here. So it's not surprising to see that the net primary productivity, the redder it is, the higher it is. It's not surprising to see that the net primary productivity is going to kind of mirror the biomes that we see, right? Tropical rainforests overlap with a lot of this area in red, right? It's not a cut and dry pattern, but we do see that low productivity is areas, a lot of the desert is low productivity, northern Africa, right? Low productivity in the tundra and the open ocean, right? So we can compare patterns because both of these things, net primary productivity and biomes, are driven by climate. That's pretty much it. That's pretty much all I got for you today. I want to leave you with this one question that we'll answer at the start of next class. Why are there no plants at the bottom of the ocean? We've been talking about plants and how they get their energy. We talked a little bit about productivity and the oceans themselves, but why aren't there any plants at the bottom of the ocean? Here's a hint for you. See if you can come up with an answer, and we'll talk about it in class next time. Thank you.